Hello there everyone, welcome again to my channel, and today, as discussed in previous video, what we are going to do is again learn TypeScript, but this is a little bit different. um, Without going to the normal way of watching some tutorials and everything, we're going to start learning with AI. So I'm going to ask some questions to AI, uh, and of course, as we have rich resources in TypeScript, um, any AI currently in the world can give us better answers. So we're going to do that, and with that I'm also making notes. I'll upload the notes in GitHub and attach the link in the description for that, so you can go through the notes. Of course, if you want, you can make your own. There won't be any background music or sound in the video because I'm just asking questions to AI, so it will be just me talking. And yeah, hope you enjoy the video. Let's begin. So I'm gonna ask the first thing is, let's just make the background. I like calling my AI ChatGPT Charlie, so let's just call it that, and it will be assume that I don't know JavaScript. And this is very important because if you just say TypeScript, sometimes it assumes that you know JavaScript already, and it will only tell you what's different. It's not going to tell you everything. That's not what I want. I want to go through TypeScript again. So I don't know any JavaScript, and beginning to learn TypeScript. First thing we are gonna go is ask about common things. Tell me some general things to begin. So let's start with this. It will just summarize some of the things that TypeScript has. Yeah, we are gonna just go with that without making any notes. If there is some importance there, I'll write it down, but this will be pretty quick, this step. Next, we'll start going deep. So let's see. It just says some variables. Variables are boolean, string, number. Yeah. Functions, we can assign type, and then this I think is for return. Perfect. This is object and interface, so type, and this is an object. Student1 is from a student. That's how you make it. Arrays, it's normal, some kind of list. TypeScript directly in browser, npm install TypeScript, tsc. Just be careful with this. If TypeScript is installed globally, you can use tsc easily, but if it's just inside some kind of folder or something, then you have to use it with npx or npm. Most of the time npx. So yeah, so it just went through variables and types. So variables, the types are number, string, and boolean. Of course, there are others as well, like enum, where you make some named constants. And then there is tuples, which is basically an array with known number of values, and the types are also known. So let's suppose we have this list here, Anant and Charlie, both are name. So I can make an tuple saying tuple two names, and it will be an array of a string, and the first value will be a string, second value will be a string. So whenever I make any variable or any tuple with the type name, if you assign it to types, then I can only put two names or two strings inside the tuple. If I put three, it will be wrong. If I put anything else, something like number or any boolean, that's wrong. And that's where TypeScript helps us actually, because in JavaScript allows us to do anything. It allows us to change the type of a variable from string to number without doing anything, just assign a value. Of course, TypeScript also allows us if we just put any. So there's a type called any, A-N-Y. That's basically making TypeScript a JavaScript. So if I assign name is a variable name to a type any, what will happen is, let's first, I can assign the name Anant, and then later on I can assign it 12, 13, anything, and it will work. There won't be any error or anything. So that was the basics. There's modules, import, export. Did it talk about module? But okay, yeah. I'm not gonna go inside if, while, and for. That's pretty simple, but we are gonna go inside functions. So let me say, perfect. Now tell me all the ways we can make a function in PS with syntax. Perfect. Let's see. So the first is normal function declaration. We can just use function, and now I'm gonna write it down, because this is one of the things that comes in handy. Of course, most of the time we're just gonna use array function, or this one, array functions. Sometimes you can use, like, you can actually use anything, but this is much easier, and I've seen and I've used this much pretty much every time. So let's just write it down. Now this here, I'm gonna take some time to write some notes. If you want, you can write, or you can just skip it. Depends on you. Perfect. Let's just write it down. The first one is normal function declaration. Function name. And with the parameters, I can give a type. I just thought of a better way to write. Okay, perfect. Second one is just assigning the function a name. One thing to notice is all these functions can be called the same way. It's just different way of writing it. Changing the way we write doesn't mean we have to change the way we call the functions. So here we'll just call it by add 1 plus 2, 1 comma 2. Here we can call it by multiply 1 comma 2. Same thing for here, divide 1 comma 2. It doesn't change everything, it's just a different way to write it. So ES6 was a style that came in some recent version. By recent, I don't mean very recent, but it's been a while, but still, it wasn't there at the beginning. At some point it came in one of the updates of JavaScript. By mentioning ES6, we are basically mentioning that array function came in ES6, and when TypeScript compiler converts our TypeScript code into JavaScript, and then it compiles it to result. In between compiling from TypeScript to JavaScript, it says that I wanna compile this TypeScript into JavaScript ES6 version. If we don't specify, it won't change it. I'm pretty sure by default it's ES6, but who knows? That's a question for other time. Of course, in this divide, you should check if my y is 0. If it's 0, then say just return null. And I'm gonna tell you how we do that, because there is a way we can specify two types, basically saying it can be this and this by using unions, and we have to like have those two types with union in between opening and closing, or greater or less than signs. So this sign, opening and closing. This is a nice way, but that's only possible with one return line. If you just have two numbers that you are taking and returning something, or any parameter and just directly returning by doing some expression or concatenation with this string. If you have more than one line, we have to use this block. So it should be inside medium braces. Functions with annotations. So it's greet. Okay, so it's saying we can define a function shape first. So more of like first having function prototype, and then later on defining the function like we do in Java. That's what I'm getting from this. So it's saying let my greet, which is a name of function, takes name, which is a string as parameter, and it returns a string. Let is important there, and then we can just use that by calling it with its name greet. We have to pass a string, and we have to return a string. greet is a function passing name, and that's just normal function declaration that we saw here. Sorry, function expression. This is optional parameters. This is one of the good things about Java and TypeScript. We can assign optional parameters, which means we can pass that if we want. If you don't want, you can exclude that and not pass it, and the function will work as it was. So how you see, it says function log message. There's a message we have to log. So if we are logging a message, it makes sense that we have to get the message as a parameter if it's not fixed. So we get a message, a string. Now depends if we wanna show the user ID, who is using it or for whom the message is for, or not. So if we want to show, we can also pass that. And now the thing is, if we don't want to show, or if we want to show, depends on us. The function doesn't know that. So what we'll do, we'll make that as a parameter here, but we'll add a question mark after that. And that makes TypeScript compiler thinks that, okay, or JavaScript thinks that user ID is a parameter, which is a number. It can be passed, but the user just cannot pass it as also, and that's fine, because there is nothing that makes us have that. So when you are using any IDE, if you have user ID as optional, and then later on in the function itself you do something like user ID equals user ID plus 1, but if you are doing it without having any braces, then that means it's not optional anymore, and that compiler will show that it's an error. You cannot do that. That's the beauty of TypeScript. Yeah, so let me just write it. It's a really good thing to have, because when you are making big applications, or when we are making some kind of, we have some form and not every element or every input is required, and then we are passing that to some function to process it, that this is really good. And that's just one example of it. Now, we need to be careful of this console.log. It says user ID. So if we provide some user ID, there will be something. So it will take it as true. This is just using ternary operator to do if and else. So it says if user ID is provided, then the message we are going to show is user ID and then the message. If it's not provided, then just show message. The more quickly you get comfortable with ternary operator, the better, because any senior developer you'll see, or I shouldn't say any, I should say most of the senior developer, or most of the time when we talk about clean coding, we talk about ternary operators because it makes it much easier. If you know what it is, it's much easier to understand, and it shortens the amount of line we have, because then we don't have to specify if, else, and all that. Of course, there are things when we have to use if and else, but most of the time it can be replaced, the if and else. So 6, by the name itself, we know just defining the value here. So it says, let me just write it down first. So default means if we don't pass anything. So here, this is also like optional parameter, but optional means if you don't pass, it will be null, right? But here, function power, default means if you don't pass, it will be this default value. So the function itself is doing, basically, if you pass just the base, it will give you the square. If you pass the base and the exponent, it will give you base to the power of that number. Rest. That's one more thing. If we are passing some kind of array, or not just that, if we are passing many different arguments, sorry, and we don't know how many we are gonna pass, we can say that. But the thing is, if we know what's the type of it, even if we don't, we can just say any, so it doesn't really matters that much. What we can do is have dot and the name of the variable, so that we can iterate over it and show it as an array of some kind. That's one more thing where it's JavaScript and TypeScript is really good, or becomes useful. It can be useful when we are making a calculator app or something, or some other things. Let's just say it that way. I know this must be pretty boring for most of you guys, because this is something we already know. Even I know most of it, or I should say all of it. It's just that I'm going to revise it from the beginning, so that even if someone who comes for the first time can start and don't feel that they are excluded. Why am I talking about that? It's funny, right? But still. Number reduce is a function in JavaScript. So a comma b doesn't means that we can only, the reduce will only have two things. Reduce will go with, reduce is a function over an array or some kind of list, where we have to show that take the first two elements and do something with it. And if we don't, a plus b comma 0 means where to start from. Take these elements and do something with it, and do the same with all of them. So it will take a position. Let's talk with position. So 0 plus anything value at position 0 plus value at position 1. It's sum it and put it at 0, and same thing you do again until there is only one number at 0. So it will add all of them and return the addition of the whole array. There is function overloading method inside object class. Okay, now function overloading, what is that? Function combine a string b. Oh, so overloading, when we are doing Java and inside object-oriented programming, we have two kind of things. First is function overloading, second is function overriding. Overriding comes with interfaces and when there is inheritance, Overloading is something else. Overloading means I can make two different functions with same name or two functions with same name. The only difference is that they have different parameters or different types of parameter. So the good part about that thing is when I'm calling anything, like when I'm calling the function and I pass a number and a string, it will go inside the function where the two arguments or parameters were number and string. If I'm calling the same function with two numbers, it will go and do its processes and work inside the function which has two different arguments which were both number. Why is it calling arguments? Okay. That was function overloading. And now that I talked about function overloading, I should just mention about overriding as well. Overriding means that comes inside inheritance or interfaces. So when we are making an interface, we can give it a function body or some kind of prototype which is used in which like the child function can call. Same with inheritance. The parent might have the same function starting with same name, same things, and it does something inside it. Let's suppose just console.log, and it consoles all the arguments it got. But the child can override that thing. It will have the same name, same parameters, but it will do something else with all those. Maybe it sums it, it prints it into some different format or something. But yeah. So the overriding basically means I just override the thing that my parent sent me, and it's perfectly fine with the compiler as well. And overloading means I'm overloading the function, or should I say I'm making the same functions just with different parameters. And if I'm calling, and I can call any of those parameter combinations. That's all. can do one more topic, then I'm gonna make it small, just 1 hour. But let's be consistent. So 1 hour every day, maybe sometimes 2 hours. So 9th one is methods inside object or classes. Let's see. Okay, so when making class, a constructor is the initial variables that we are passing to that class whenever we are calling it. And this is just basically saying I'm gonna use the name which was provided to this function, this class. Same as inside an object, we can create a function and then we can call it using calculator dot, using the dot operator, add, and inside, and then use the add as we use function to call. Inside parentheses, you can pass parameter and return something. I know for some of us, the class and interface must be something new. But don't worry, we'll cover that when we go into object-oriented programming using TypeScript, because object-oriented programming is like one of the most important thing in any language that is object-oriented. So that was all the functions. If you notice something, I'll make sure we write it in the function section as well. But that's mostly it that we are going to use most of the time. So these two come under object-oriented programming. This is not object-oriented. This is basically making an object. Okay, it is object-oriented, I guess. These are, so from 1 to 7 was something we'll use normally. And it comes in pretty handy, even writing basic JavaScript without any extensive backend work. This thing comes when we are dealing with backend ourselves, when we are making backend or any React app where we want modularization. So you can divide things into module, then it's pretty easy to use. Just import and export it. So that was functions. Now what does it say? I'll make it later. So let's go inside some of the functions that TypeScript provides us. But wait, now that we are using in functions, I'm just gonna ask one more thing. Can we make a function multiple type? This might be a little bit more tricky to understand. Multiple types or have a general type or something like return number or null. Yeah, so you can make a function return multiple types or a generalized type. That's one of the TypeScript's strongest feature. Let's see. So this operator is union operator. This function is doing something, but what's happening here is this function find user A's can return two things, number or null. So when the name is Anant, it knows my name. Wow. when the name is Anant, of course I knew that. Yeah. When the name is Anant, it will return 20. That's wrong. When the name is not Anant, it will return null, because for this thing, this guy thinks my age is 20 and it doesn't know anybody else's name. So if it gets some name of some person who it knows, it will say, okay, that's the age, and if it doesn't, that will be null. So that means we can do that. When calling TS forces you to handle both. Okay, so if you're calling, then it will force you to handle both. Let age is find user Anant. If age is null, then console.log this. That's nice. Yeah. Any, not recommended. So basically, one more thing we can do is, instead of having number and null, we can just say any, and it will let us return anything, basically, just like JavaScript. And see, downside, you lose type safety. That's why you switched from JavaScript to TypeScript. And then comes unknown. So unknown, it could be anything, but you must check before using it. That's nice, because this says function, it will get some input, return type is unknown, so it can return random. It will first take a random value. If random gives us from 0 to 0.99. If it's more than 0.5, then we return data, so it will return a string. If it's not, then we return 1, 2, 3. Here, because we have unknown, we have to check it. See how it just made it uppercase. Basically means it just assumed that every time we'll get a string, so I can make it uppercase. No, it's wrong. So you have to use type of to get the type of input, and then if it's a string, we do something. If it's not, then you can have else, or it can just don't do anything. Then comes generic. Generic is a really nice thing. So this is something I learned from Java. Now let's see how TypeScript deals with generic. So I have an identity, which is a generic type T. So to make a function generic, we have to use this. there's a value of type t and it returns type t. A generic function means I make a type generic, so it's a general type, and then I can use it with anything inside that block of function. Basically saying if making a variable. So in JavaScript we can make a variable a type, and then we can make a type a variable. So basically saying t is a variable that represents a type. If t is a string, then the value it takes, the argument must be string, and the value it returns will also be string. If t is a number, so if t is of type number, then the value it takes all should be a number, and that the value it will return will also be a number. That's nice. Now comes void and never. So void means function doesn't return anything normally. Never means function never finishes. Basically an infinite loop, or when we have to throw an error or some kind. So error never finishes, because whenever an error comes, it breaks our program, and then there is an error. It goes on until the error is fixed. If the error is fixed, then this won't go inside it. Perfect. So let me write it down, because this is some useful things, and it's pretty useful. This is really important for me and you to understand. Of course, all these are, but still, the two things that are important is this and then generic. The others are some of the predefined keywords that JavaScript has, and predefined types that we can use with functions. So I'm just going to make note within the function itself. So after 9 I have 10, and you'll get all of these. So now I'm guessing we'll finish with function today, and then not go beyond that, because we covered most of the functions, or should I say all of it. So the 10 will be union types, this operator. Find user is name string. The type will be name or null. The name is Anand. Return some number, else return null. Wanted to make sure returning null and a void. So return type of null and a void is different. Null means I'm going to return null. I'm going to return something which is null. Void means I'm going to return nothing. There is nothing to return in the first place, so I'm not going to even return null. Something like you just console log something, print something, so you do something within itself and you don't return anything at all. Of course, you can just write return and have nothing. That also means void. I'm just gonna make a note. When calling, we have to handle both types. And this is where, my friends, a ternary operator comes pretty much very handy. If we have a union of type number and null, or any other thing and null, we can just use inside medium braces, so the curly braces, you can write, let's take an example here, age, and then we can have a ternary operator, means if age is null, will go in the second block. If age has something, will go in the first block. So if age has something, that means we passed the right name and we got the age. We do the first block before the column. If age has nothing, if it's null, that means that expression will be false. We do the second block that's after the column. And we use that most of the time by dealing with any JavaScript code. And many times in front-end development, when we get something from back-end, we have a promise, we get some information. If it's null, then I'm gonna say the second part, that it's still loading. If it's not null, I'm gonna say the first part, okay, it's loaded, I'll pass everything and show something to the user. I'm not gonna write any, because we already know any is a type. So if you use that, it's basically making TypeScript, a JavaScript, unknown. It's still safer than any, but it is unknown. So having more knowledge is always better. Who told you that ignorance is bliss? Who said having more knowledge is better? So I'm not gonna write an example. I'm just gonna say what it said. It could be anything. But you must check before using it. That's important. Generic, my friend, is something, as mentioned earlier, is important. Generics. It's a very simple thing in itself, but for some people, I've seen from many beginners, it's very tricky, because as I said, you're making a type a variable, when in JavaScript or any object-oriented language, a variable itself can become a type. So a class itself is a type, an interface is a type, and we can use it as a variable here in generic. Not that a variable, it becomes a value for a variable. So it gets tricky, but if when you use it one time, you see an example and just make yourself believe that it can happen, it's pretty easy to understand in itself. Just be careful that we have to use these greater than less than sign whenever using generic. I'm gonna make note of void and never, because that's something new for me. So function. Okay, come on. Void is not something new for me. I just said it because I had to say it whenever. So message string void, and as I mentioned earlier, you can just console something. Console.log message. We don't return anything. Never most of the time you have when there is an error, or you have to throw an error, you just catch it first from the block. You use try and catch. That's the best option, or the best thing to do. But sometimes we do need to make error messages. So if there is an error, we can just call that function. So this is not a good example. A good example would be something like you call an API and you got nothing, and you know something like that's gonna happen many times because you're calling many APIs in your program. You can first make this kind of function saying 404 or endpoint API endpoint field or something, and then throw some kind of error or a good description of everything and log it. Perfect. That was 53 minutes, friends. That should be more than enough. Yeah, that should be more than enough. Now, that was 1, 2, 3, and 4 pages just for the function, but we also covered generics. We looked a little into object-oriented programming. We got to know some of the keywords that JavaScript has, or predefined types you can say for functions. We covered mostly everything for function. We covered arrow function, unions, overloading, optional parameters, rest parameters. Rest doesn't mean it means all the rest of it. We covered default parameters, type annotations, which is basically assigning prototype, that the function name will be this, the parameters passed will be of this type, and the return will be of this type. That's prototype that we specify at the beginning. If I'm not confusing myself, then in C, not Java. Java, of course we can do that. Arrow functions, function expressions, which is basically giving a name to function. Function declaration. All of these functions can be called similarly by using just the name and normally how we call a function. In parentheses, we pass the parameters. One thing good is this thing. So you can have an object that just has 7 or 8 functions, and you call those functions using object name using dot parameter to refer inside that I'm calling items inside, and then that function. Normally how you call the function. So that's where I'm gonna stop today. Tomorrow I'm thinking we are gonna look into general use string functions, general use array and array functions or list functions. But by list I'm saying all the array kind, like array, tuple, and everything that can come inside. General use object functions. So some objects can be used as some of the array function can be used over object, but still we'll figure it out how much there is. And that's where JavaScript is good at, or TypeScript is good at, because it provides many predefined functions for these separate types that can be used. But it's get much harder to remember all of these functions. So let's just go through it once more. To be fair, I don't remember most of it, but still it's good to just go with them. An example of an array function will be just that we saw here, which was reduce. This one, this is an array function. So how it iterates over the array of nums of parameter passed, and it gives the sum of everything. An example of a string function will be this guy right here, to uppercase. So it will take in a string, it will make all the characters to its uppercase. It's gonna be fun, trust me, it's gonna be fun, and it will be some good learning. So at this point, I'm gonna leave you alone, do something fun, have fun in your life, and bye bye.